Please remember to rate and provide feedback for the presentation. Everyone knows what is the app by now, right? Any questions you have, you can tell me, okay? So now we're going to listen to Dr. Pangades, specialist in education, computer-aided language learning, and educational management with 30 years of experience.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for having me. As I said, I don't even drink coffee, but my name is Juan. I have no idea. I am Dominican. I came here last month to work for my name in school as an actor. And they told me it was a coffee with my name. I was like, what? And I heard all the stories out on TV at the airport. You are one of them. You're famous. Great. I never made it to fame as a teacher, so let's do it now as a company. Well, I'm actually a school director. I am the executive director of DR TESOL as well. I've been in TESOL for over 30 years, and I've been in TESOL International for 25 years as well. 6 years ago, we created Dominican Republic TESOL, which is a chapter for TESOL International in the DR. And ever since, we've been traveling around visiting TESOLs in Latin America. About 12 years ago, we started doing this individually, but then we united in the Caribbean region to try to connect with other TESOLs. My private job, because TESOL is just basically professional affiliation work, is as a school director. I work as a director for St. Lawrence School. This is a bilingual school in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. And we are try to be a very creative school. But we are, as most of us, in Latin America and in a poor country. And that implies a lot when we talk about language development and innovation. We do a lot of work. And this is part of what we do. This is some of my staff. I'm proud of my staff, some of the kids, and the programs we participated in. And last year, as a consultant, I was hired by the World Bank and the Dominican Ministry of Education to do some research on language, science, and math. As you may all know, Latin America has the lowest scores in the PISA tests worldwide. In fact, the Dominican Republic has the lowest score, unfortunately, in the world in language, science, and math. So, as a school director, I was worried, what can I do to improve science, math, and especially language development with my students? Of course, this was the vision from a school director. Then, since I am also a computer systems engineer, I decided to go into coding programming. Just to try to make it more creative. Because I noticed after my research, which I used actually about 900 schools I evaluated in my whole country, it came to me that traditional teaching wasn't doing the job. Not in science, not in math, and especially not in language development. So we went into something more creative. And we thought about the two key languages for the future, which are actually English and coding. But people ask me, why? Is coding a language? And that is the first question I'm going to ask you. I would like to get some responses from you. Do you feel that coding, programming, can that be called a language? Yes. Why? What was that? Alright, any other thoughts on it? Because they call them programming languages. That's what it all came to me as it was if you're talking about language. I want to go into a more diverse, creative way to improve language. So, can we call programming a language? This is a question I would like to pose. Why and how?
Because it's an abstract system of symbols and the rules that bind them that we use to convey a specific meaning, and we use to do certain stuff. Also, in language, you have a discrete pitch, you have a certain number of rules, certain number of symbols, and you have a limited number of performances. And you can do that with programming or as a language.
Can anybody else elaborate on that? Because in Spanish, we have idioma and we have lenguaje. Notice that nobody ever says in Spanish, idiomas de programación. point is that they say lenguajes de programación, but not idiomas de programación. There must be a difference. In English, we use the word language. So let's delve more into it to see what comes out of this. First of all, what is coding? What do they call coding? Well, they say coding is basically the computer language, again, the word language, used to develop apps, websites, and software to program robots. Now, can we equate the word program with communicate? Program robots or communicate with robots? Could those terms be equated? From a linguistic standpoint, sir?
So I think there's a kind of response that we can expect as a communicative action afterwards. I mean, there's an interaction, and then when you elaborate a message, you expect that after the process of sending it to the one who's receiving it, you expect something that definitely is not like standardized. I mean, they can give any answer when you give them robots. If you give the answer, you expect them to give you because of what you are giving them. So in that way, I understand how could it be, called communication.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir?
Could you substitute the word program with teach?
No.
You teach an app, you teach a website, you teach a robot.
What do you guys think? And then you substitute it. Program by
Teaching robots.
They know nothing, and you use code to teach them.
Well, with learning, I mean, I don't think robots learn. I mean, not at all. They're just like executing some functions. Like just giving the codes, they do what you tell them. I mean, if you have an algorithm, they just do what you guide them through. They don't have any kind of responses. As soon as they do, it's
Call that metaphor learning, artificial learning.
When you formulate language, couldn't that be called an algorithm as well? You use the word algorithm for the computers. Now, when you formulate an idea that responds, couldn't that be called an algorithm as well? So, as language teachers and computer programmers, we are looking for connections on how to connect technology, coding, with language development, and more than just language development, the whole education experience. Let's go deeper into it now. When I started this project, I had a meeting with all the parents in my school. Parents never miss a meeting in my school. We have 400 kids, and we have 400 parents there in every meeting. And it was hard for me to convince parents that my students in first grade primary school would be programming robots. Basically, because people don't believe it is possible. Especially parents, they are not educators. And they associate the word robot with something from a different dimension. Too good, too far. And it's hard for me as a school director to convince parents that this is possible. So we had to elaborate on why coding and robotics, which goes far beyond language teaching and learning. So let's read ahead. The quality of the learning that takes place when we focus our attention only on the items to be learned is different from, probably in figure 2, the quality of the learning that is incidental to something else that we are trying to do. In my using coding to improve language development, I wasn't actually focusing on programming. I was focusing on skills development. What can happen when you challenge kids in first grade primary school? They're barely learning Spanish and English. So they're learning 2 languages already. What about a third language? From a different perspective. Why robotics and coding? What about the profile of our students today? You are thinking as adults. Now let's wear children's shoes. What do they like today? How does Mark Prensky code? Remember Mark Prensky? How does Prensky label kids for nowadays?
Digital natives.
Digital natives. And what is the profile of a digital native? Learning preferences and learning style of a kid that is 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old. What do they prefer doing day by day? They love technology. They love gadgets. Most kids label schools as boring.
you ask a kid whether he prefers to stay home in front of a TV or go to school, what do you think the answer would be? Stay home, much too. They don't find school interesting or challenging enough. And there are people who still believe that schooling is mandatory, which is not a good word, mandatory. So my intent was to make the learning experience more interesting and more attractive to kids, but at the same time make it more challenging and more of a skill-building experience. And that's why coding and robotics actually occurred to me as a school director. It was a hard path, because the first ones to challenge this were parents. And when parents are not on board, it's very hard to do any innovative actions in schools. So I had to explain this to parents one by one. But why focusing on robots too? Well, they captivate the imagination of students. Imagine you're teaching language. You use what? A book, mostly. Prompts, some aids. But kids are captivated by technology and robots in particular. It promotes 21st century skills, which is key, at least in the school I direct. The slogan of our school is education for the future. And then parents ask me, why? What would jobs be like in 20 years when my kid goes out of school? Okay, he's only 4 years old. How is he going to get a job? What is he going to do? You can't predict today that reading, writing, math, and science will do the trick for education for the future. So since my school's slogan is education for the future, I was actually mandated to do something more innovative. It's interdisciplinary by nature. You're not learning programming. You're not just playing with toys. There are so many disciplines that you can work with through robotics and coding. And it relates to real-world applied technologies, because why have we lost so many jobs? Automation. Robots can do the job of 100 people. They don't get sick. They don't take vacation. It's real. So, what was that? They don't ask for a raise, it says. But they're constantly So, why else did I go into coding and robotics? Let me ask you a question. Look at these pictures of YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. What do they all have in common? And what about social media? What are they actually looking for? How does YouTube work? What's that? What do you mean?
Most of the resources or basic content that they have is produced by the users. They are not even produced.
How does Facebook make money? Legally speaking. How do they make money? How does Facebook make money? What's the business model for Facebook? Ads? It's not the big money for Facebook. How does Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, how do you think they make money? What do they sell? Ads? What do they sell?
Information.
What they sell is you. Your information. When he mentioned the word algorithm, how do you think they create an algorithm?
You track it. It's just like seeing whatever you click, you're just checking what you like, you don't, and then you're going to find all the pop-ups and you're showing you what you expect as a result of that.
They track your habits, your likes, dislikes. Yes?
No, some people say that is the oil of the future. The dates, the information. The dates is the oil of the future. Some people say that.
They use your habits, to gather information, build algorithms, and what they sell is not advertisements. They sell information, and they program the whole net by that. So we have a problem today. Most people don't even understand. In this era, with children, you have to teach them to either program or be programmed. Most of us are programmed. Computers, these companies, they use all the information they can gather from you, and they program you. They know the size, the color of the clothes you're going to buy, the kinds of shoes, just by your habits. They collect all that information. And they program you. And they program our children. Why do you think children like PlayStation so much? Even from a PlayStation, if it is online, they collect information. So people today are programmed by these social networks. So my idea of programming or coding products was to also teach my students that in this era, you can either program or be programmed. And you have to teach them that from a very early age. Through language. Something else. The language of computer science is English. That's why I talk about language development. So we're not just teaching language. We are teaching life skills. 21st century skills, and most importantly, awareness. How aware are your students of the world they live in? And the habits, and how people are controlled nowadays? By a simple algorithm. Every time you go to Facebook or YouTube, they collect, and they just give you a customized answer. So my idea about programming is basically a defensive move. Everybody should learn how to program, at least our children. We are a different generation, already lived through a different time. But our kids will live in a world where they will either program or be programmed. Talking about coding and 21st century skills, students need 7 survival, and look at this, survival skills to be prepared for the 21st century. First, critical thinking and problem solving. As the President of the Dominican Republic, TISL, I usually go on the news, newspapers, and interviews on television. And I am very critical of the education system in Latin America because we are educating citizens without critical thinking and problem solving skills. Our system is basically transmission of data and information. And kids have no critical thinking skills. And they're not taught to be critical. They are taught to accumulate data, basically. Now, when you code or program, you have to do a lot of analysis, and especially a lot of trial and error, over and over again. It's not just like solving a mathematical formula. Collaboration and leadership. You have clubs, coders, live, online. There's a lot to do with interaction. Agility and adaptability, initiative and entrepreneurialism, effective oral and written communication skills. He mentioned the word communicating or talking to a robot. Well, you can use any word, but there is an interchange between the one who produces the code and the receiver of the code. Accessing and analyzing information, and curiosity and imagination. Would you say that our education system sparks curiosity? Well, I'm a school director and I've been in the field for 30 years, and I can tell you, that's not the Latin American reality. There's very little creativity. I wonder how kids still go to school. This generation? Keep in mind that this generation is hyper-stimulated since the minute they are born. If you bring a 3-year-old here today in front of this board, what do you think is the first thing he will do? I would do this. He would do this. The kid doesn't know another word. So it's hard for a kid to go to a traditional school to just sit there and listen to a teacher read and write. How do you expect to improve language like that? Say, why are my students always silent? That is something I was going through. Then we had to create a solution for that that was tailored to the profile of our students nowadays. Now, what about English and coding? English teaching can be done in conjunction with learning students to work with coding and robotics, so that between the two, they inculcate aspects of the 21st century skills mentioned before, while promoting language development. What I am doing in my school is both. Kids needed to improve language, especially in primary school. They were recipients. They had a lot of receptive skills, but not many productive skills from a linguistic standpoint. Once again, raise your hands, those of you who think or agree with the fact that coding is a real language program. All right, the majority of you agree. Okay, the truth is that coding is not a language. Strictly a language. Let's see why. Computers and the code that powers them are literal, emotionless, strict, and free of nuance or ambiguity. When you find a definition of language, languages are not merely literal. There is what? Connotation. And there is no connotation in computer code. That's impossible in computer code. There is no emotion in computer code. Languages bring about emotion. There is not ambiguity. It is impossible. There can be ambiguity when you code a computer. From a strictly academic and linguistic perspective, only naturally occurring languages that are developed out of organic inclination to communicate qualify as a real language. So let's make it clear. People who claim that computer coding is like computer languages, well, organic here is the basic word. Why organic? Because of emotion, because of error and ambiguity, basically because of that. A language, to be a real thing, needs to come out of the organic need to communicate. And do you remember this Harvard professor who wrote the book, The Language Instinct? Remember that book? The Language Instinct. I recommend you all read it. It's a great book. When he states that languages are an instinct, an organic instinct. You remember Dr. Krashen and basically his theory of comprehensibility and all that. It's basically in the same line of thought. It's Steven Pinker, that's his name. He was the one who wrote that book. And I loved it because he referred to it as an instinct. So computer coding is not a real language. It's a code. You could say it's a communication code, but not a language. Now, there are 4 ways in which coding or learning to code is like learning another language. That we can say. Let's remember the 5 stages of language development. How are they similar? Not the same. First of all, when you are coding, there is always a silent or receptive phase. When you begin to code and you don't know a thing, you are in a silent period. Do you all remember the silent period? It's the same thing. When you are beginning to code, imagine a kid. Just watching, learning. In that way, learning to code is like learning a second language or another language. There's always early production. Today, they had an exercise at the Technology Hub where they asked a few teachers, can you actually produce a movement in your product? It was basically a few lines of code. It's a step-by-step early production stage. Languages are the same. How do you begin a language? At the word level. You begin by words. And you spend a long time trying to put a whole sentence together. Remember Piaget? Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development? How long does it take a child to say, Mom, I am hungry? In average. How long does it take a person, a human being? From the minute he or she is born to the minute they say, Mom, I am hungry. From 1 to 2 years. In average. In average. You know what I mean? So, what was that? How long did it take you? What was that? You were born hungry. That's it. How long does it take you? It's to express it. How can you express that? Put a whole sentence together. Imagine coding. You begin at the letter word, at the letter. At first, the word, it's very simple. Then speech emergence or production comes. You can put a few lines together rubber to. That's all. Same thing happens in language. Then you have intermediate fluency. You begin coding for real. You can get, a few lines together to move a whole machine and get it to do something meaningful. And finally, there's continued language development. How many of you are programmers or coders? Look, what I'm saying is, I'm an English teacher, I love coding. English teachers do so many things. And let me tell you something. Don't you ever say you're just an English teacher. Teaching is more complex than rocket science. Far more complex. If you are really into it, passionately, professionally, it takes far more skills. So, let's get to the point that 4 ways, of learning to code is very similar to learning the second language. Now, let's go one by one and review this. First, both coding and language are tools used to build a creative narrative. What do you do with coding? First of all, students learn a structure that is similar to learning grammatical rules. Coding, for example, is like grammar. It's either wrong or right, grammatically speaking. Because if you write one period in the wrong position, nothing will happen. So why am I teaching kids about language and they code? Accuracy. When you learn to program, when kids are learning to program a robot, it's writing, it's a language, it's the English language they're using. But what else are they learning? Accuracy, grammar, precision, correctness. And that's a language skill too. So in that way, it is very similar. It also teaches students how to break down complex ideas into simple steps. Creative thinking, problem solving. To get a robot to go from this spot to that spot, then turn left, it takes a few lines. And then we have to break it into different steps. Languages are the same. Again, you begin at the letter, the word, and then the sentence level, then the paragraph level, and then far beyond that. Students learn the basic lexicon and syntax in simple sentences before engaging in complex language structures and conversations. Same story. Does anyone of you teach basic English? You do. How long does it usually take a kid? Do you teach adults or children? Okay, how long, especially, it's even worse. Adults are really hard too. The stage fright thing, the affective filter in adults is very hard to deal with.
And the why?
The why?
Because if you don't support what you are teaching, you don't give reasons, they do not want to do it.
Really?
Yeah, so it's why you say, I am healthy and I am healthy. It doesn't make sense to me. Why I am for
Oh, no, I
why
get it.
I am
Got it.
well.
Got it. All right. Now I
So
get it.
why?
Exactly. So what they learn with the famous verb to be, for example, a basic vocabulary about school, family, or work, right? Same thing happens in learning to code, in learning to program. Now, both coding and language require breaking it down into small steps. You can't become speaker of English. Well, they sell courses that say learn English in 6 months. Have you met anybody who can actually do it, or has actually done it? So it takes step by step. Same thing happens with coding. Learning to code or learning a new language helps, in this case, young people, learn how to break down large and potentially intimidating tasks into small projects. The learning process, the language learning process, just like coding, is broken down into small steps. Experiential learning is better. Constructivism. There isn't a more constructivist experience than coding. Because you need to live it. Imagine what you are giving a small robot. Get it to move. Get it to do something. Both learning to code and learning a new language are best learned by actually participating in the activities. You want to learn it? You have to live it. You want to code it? You have to do it. Over and over and over again. Trial and error. It's not just receptive skills. You have to do something to make it happen. You learn by making mistakes. Adults have a problem. Effectively. Stage fright. They don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to be in front of people just saying, me like music. Me like music. What am I doing? Coding is the same thing. You have to make 100 mistakes to learn to get a robot to do a basic move. and try over and over again. And what are the skills you are learning? Resilience, persistence, perseverance. So what I'm trying to do is to compare how learning another language is similar to learning to code or program. Now, this was my situation as a school director. How do I start then integrating coding into my school was my question. Let's be real, okay? We live in poor countries, Latin America. When you mention the word robots, it's associated with what? Cost, expense. What is the truth? Hardware is expensive. 5 or even 10 students will share the same robot in one school. Hard to train coding teachers and robotics teachers. Very few teachers in Latin America. Teachers don't have that mastery. It's not measurable. How do you measure, we, people who direct schools, progress and results? In consequence, 99% of students in Latin America are left out of the coding and robotics learning experience. 99%. And I had to solve the problem, and my solution was this. I was presented with Coders. Coders is basically an online environment where students worldwide learn science, technology, engineering, and math by coding virtual 3D robots. What was important for me? That this was affordable. I couldn't spend $10,000 on a kit that was only going to be used by, 20 students. And I had 400 students. With Coders, it was a subscription-based solution. It was an integrated solution. Something else, I had 400 students. With a robotics kit, you only can attend to 20 or 15 students at a time. In this case, it was self-paced, online content, and it included professional development. I didn't have to train the teachers. They would do it. And then it was accessible. Why? Because it was browser-based. Easy to use and level up because it was online. So this for me was very important. Affordable, scalable, and accessible, because I wanted to make it accessible to everybody. All the kids in my school, not just a few programmers. What did it include? It includes 3D simulation, co-creators, gamified missions. This is very important for learning a foreign language, gamification. Take curriculum, so I didn't have to design a curriculum for it, and so forth. I'm running out of time. This is the way it looks. You have, in the environment, multiple scenes, engaging challenges, immediate feedback, and access from school or home. Very important for me. I wanted my kids to be able to program robots from home, not depend on a teacher, and to get support. He had a code editor, and the code was both textual and visual. For the kids, it's like playing. In fact, the language they use is called blocking. Have you ever seen Scratch? Very similar to Scratch. It was blocking. It was like using blocks. The missions were gamified, so the kids were like playing. They didn't realize they were learning to code. They were playing. They used a few words, they put a few words together to get a robot to do something. And they thought this was a game. They didn't realize this was actually learning to program. The curriculum was important for me. We don't have time to create a coding curriculum in schools. So we were provided with all the components, a 60-hour program with all the instructions and curricular content. It was based on Bloom's taxonomy. All the stages of higher order thinking skills were considered here. This is a sample lesson, for example. Take a look at this. How polygons work. This is a challenge. This doesn't look like a coding lesson. This looks like a math lesson. And the kids were given a chance to do it by programming the robots to get the polygon to work. Another one was the challenge with getting geometry. Oh, something else. I have everything. Because I have math, science, and language all at once in the same solution. It was cloud-based. So look at this platform. Me, in this case, as a school director, I have control of all the students. These are real students. Look at that. These are real classes, teachers. So I can track down what they do every day, how well they do it, and this gives me a daily report on everything that is happening. So I can follow up on the teacher, and I can follow up on my students, and know who is working and who is not working. We had 45 interactive lessons. My teachers were giving a teacher's guide, lesson plans, sample solutions. We had tests, all So as a school director, I didn't have to think about all this. All this was given to me all at once. And most importantly, what parents needed from me, because parents hold you accountable. I could measure progress. I could measure results. I had the student logins and time spent, the editions attended, and the results in each one, and I had class statistics. So I could follow up on the whole teaching and learning experience. And that's important when you manage or direct a school, because you are held accountable. Support online and presentially. I had some robots, some physical robots. How much does a physical robot cost here in Colombia? They're very expensive all over Latin America. So what is good about this thing is that you can program the virtual robot and the same code. You can use, an SD card. You can use the same code, save it in an SD card, and then plug it into a real robot, and it'll do the same thing you see on the screen. So the virtual robot is the same physical robot, especially with the Lego Kids robots. So to finalize, because I only have 5 minutes, and I want to get some questions and comments. This is how I began. I had a challenge. Only 1% of the students got to learn robotics. The hardware is very expensive. It was hard for me to train teachers, and it was not measurable. My solution? Well, I got a software that was virtually everything online, and that it was now accessible to my 400 students. Everybody could do it. Before, only around 20 students could actually work with a robot. And programming, 3 or 4 kids actually had, intentions of programming. No one else wanted to do it, just wanted to play with a toy. Since this solution doesn't need hardware, I could not use one robot. I could use any robot because it is on screen. And I could use the code generated by the program to insert it in a physical robot. So no hardware needed. And teachers were provided with all the tools they needed by online training and presential training. Think about this from my standpoint, from a school director's point. I have to make sure the kids learn. I have to make sure teachers do their job and do it well. And I have to make sure it actually works. And parents and kids get results. So I needed a systemic solution, an integral solution. And this is what I found. Now, since I have results and I can track down student work and teachers' work, I could measure and compare results. So I went from a challenge to a solution. This is my group. I'm very proud to say last month, I was actually here in Colombia, in Bucaramanga, evaluating school when I got the news. My students went to the first Legal League Challenge. It's a competition for programming, And these are my students. We won first prize nationwide in 1 year. So this was for us a great leap. Because not only did they take the whole program, but they got something else. So basically, this is what I wanted to talk to you about today. How we went from a challenge to a solution that was accessible to all. Thank you very much. Now let's get to the questions. Comments, questions, ideas, experiences.
Cost.
I have no idea how much it costs here locally. My presentation is basically not about cost. It is about the process we went through. As a school director, I am actually obliged to find a solution for my problems in schools. And this is what I went through this. For us in our country, it was very inexpensive. I don't even remember how much we paid for it. Yeah.
How often did the students have classes?
Well, that's the thing.
How much time?
I don't know how it works here, but in our curriculum, there is time allotted for computer science. What we did, since, for example, you don't teach computer science in theory nowadays. I don't know how you do it here in Colombia. Do you have computer science in an interdisciplinary fashion, or is there a specific class called computer science? The same thing happens in my country. So we integrated this program into the computer science classes because kids complain. Imagine, in my country, for example, computer science is, how do you define hardware? What is a computer? How do you define mouse? What is a processor? Kids don't need to learn the definition of something they use every day. It's theory. Kids don't need that much theory nowadays because they are practical. It's practice in computer science. So we did it 3 days a week, but that was instruction-based. Since we have this platform, take a look at this. They did it every day. Look at this. With this, you can follow up on their access. Just click on the student, and you'll find out how often they use it, what time they use it, whether or not they completed the missions, and how well they completed it. So the kids were motivated to doing it by themselves, anytime, any minute. But in school, they had 3 days a week class.
3 hours in total.
Yeah, in total. Because the idea, remember, instructionism is not longer in fashion. It's not in fashion anymore. The thing is not about transmission of information. The thing is about getting the kids engaged. Remember Albert Einstein, when he said, I never teach my students. I only try to provide the right conditions for my students to learn. It's not about teaching. It's about coaching. Yes.
How long did it take to reach the program?
10 months. We did the program in 10 months. The first part of the program. The whole thing, my content studio is 10 months. So we initiated the program just with teacher training. The first part of it was, in fact, there were 2 teachers. One of the teachers was a math teacher. He was not a computer science teacher because it's very easy. It's very easy to do. Any homework teacher that is actually into innovation could do it. Any English teacher could do this. Believe it. Yes, sir.
Do you know if this classroom have control, like for example, video games or software, things like that?
It does include, it actually encourages kids to create their own video games. To create them. Not to be consumers, but to be creators. You see? You could see, let me show you, there's one slide that shows a 3D move up here. They program and then they can see the execution of the code in a whole environment, like an avatar world. And they can see it in action. That's how it works. Because there's simulation. And the same robot you see there is physical in the Lego robot world. Because the Lego robot world has all those robots. Well, any more doubts, questions, ideas? Time is over. Well, thank you very much. Have a good day. Enjoy. One more thing before I go. I would like to invite you all to come to the Dominican Republic. On July 26th, we will have our annual convention. We have over 2,000 teachers coming over. And today, before you go home, most of you are Colombians, right? Some of you are Colombians. I'm giving a closing plenary speech here today on why English is not learned in Latin American public education.